was called Got What It Takes, Successful People Reveal How They Made It to
Made
the
it to the top. Yeah.
Yeah. So what I did was I just reached out to people whom, for the most part, I knew, and some of them included Whoopi Goldberg, names you can't mention anymore, like Matt Lauer, like Bill Cosby,
Sure.
Donald Trump, Diane von Furstenberg,
Oh my gosh.
Richard Branson, Joe Torre, Renee Zellweger, Brooke Shields. There were there are 44 people. And so he was one of the people. He was actually the only person in the book whom I did not interview face to face. He answered the questions in a written form. But I'd known Trump only like standing around at events since 1975.
You know, and it's interesting, Bill, and it would be appropriate that you've done this. You have a one-man show in which you discuss your television career, but also, and I think it's a tremendous credit, you've also been a motivational speaker, haven't you?
Well, thank you, Kreskin. Yes, you know, the gift that you have of mentalism and the way you've been able to, in your incredible career, just, emerge to the front of the people who do what you do as mentalists. The gift I had was as a speaker, as a public speaker. When I was in 5th grade or 6th grade, every child in the class had to get up in front of the classroom and talk, and some of the kids were wetting their pants. They were so nervous. I just got up.
You just got up and did it.
And then I won a public speaking contest in junior high school in Philadelphia. And so I always wanted to, and that really led me to being on television, that ability to speak. And I always wanted to try to take what I learned in my life from interviewing so many people. I took something about what I call experienced wisdom. The fact that it isn't always business strategies, and it's not necessarily the person with the best education or the most contacts.
Not that kind of formula, no.
Makes it. And so this book was about that, achieving success and the internal qualities that led to successful people.
And I think you would agree with me, because Bill, unfortunately, it's disappearing in modern culture today. And I've written about this. I'm writing now my 22nd, 23rd book. I've written 21 books so far, but they don't have the gift that you have with of also being able to handle fiction, because I've traveled. The airline industry announced two and a half years ago, I've now flown a little over 2.5 million miles, 2.5 million. And airline travel today, I'm not saying it's glamorous, because it is not, but it's an experience. But the interesting thing is, I remember, and I read twice that it's been suggested that a play be done about your life. Wasn't that considered at one point, an inspirational type?
Here's what happened. I had this first novel written in 1980 called At First Sight. And that book and my off-Broadway show, Confessions of a Talk Show Host, were optioned together for what would have, it never got made, what would have been a movie that was inspired by my off-Broadway show, which is really about my television career, and a novel which was loosely based on my life and television career. But the movie, like many other things, it never got made. But that was a very interesting experience. And it's fair to say that, yes, it would have been a movie inspired by my life. I mean, my life, I honestly, I've been so blessed. I have wonderful parents. I've just been blessed in my life.
But I think, I tell you what, I'm sorry, Bill.
I'm a grateful human being.
I tell you, I could talk to you for hours. I say this to the viewers. You folks don't know, I have a multitude of, and we can't get to all the questions, but so many things. I did not know, Bill, that amongst your broadcast work that you did some things dealing with restaurant and food. Is that correct? I didn't know this about you.
It's interesting.
How did you get into that?
I was actually on the Food Network the night that it went on the air, 1990, early 94, until 2002. So I was on the Food Network a long time. I had a couple of different shows on the Food Network. I've always enjoyed dining. And people say, how did you get on the Food Network? I said, well, I wore out a credit card in restaurants, and I wasn't a chef or anything like that, but I have the ability to go into a restaurant, like many people do,
Yes.
assess the atmosphere, the sound, the lighting, and that helped me. And at the time, my companion was a chef, Ishbel, and so I was learning a lot about food. Yeah, and so those shows, Bill Boggs Corner Table shows, uh, some of the, you know what I say? This is from the Off-Broadway show, Kreskin. I say, the biggest scam I ever pulled off. I got the Food Network to pay me really good money to go to the greatest restaurants in America, sit down with big name celebrities for free, and be on television, and they paid me to have lunch with Sophia Loren.
But let me, oh my God. But I'll tell you what's also remarkable about you, and I did not know this also. You did a television series on boxing? You were involved in boxing? Where did you went everywhere?
Well, you know, honestly, Kreskin, stop and think for a second. I recall you as somebody who loved hiking and someone who played the piano beautifully.
And I still do in my concerts, yeah.
I'm sure you still do. So although people were incredulous that I was actually on the Food Network and working for Showtime, covering boxing, doing celebrity interviews and doing championship boxing updates, not blow by blow, people could not, how can you be on the Food Network and how can you? I said, well, I have more than one interest. And it's interesting. It's the same with you. After I left Channel 4, Weekend Today in New York, Matt Blank, a classmate from the University of Pennsylvania, head of Showtime, called me. And he said, I think you'd be great covering boxing. These guys used to, my father and I used to watch, Friday night fights. And I always liked the sport of boxing, particularly back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, a great period of time. And they see me at the fights. And so they literally hired me based on the fact that they knew I had an interest in it.
You know, it's funny.
I wasn't an expert, but like, say, Len Berman might have been. But
I only mention this parenthetically because I'm more interested in your career and work. But at the same time, I dated a gal whose father trained in Essex County, New Jersey, young people, school people into boxing. And years later, I was approached by a professional manager in boxing to help train 4 different boxers because I had an office for 8 years with a clinical psychologist early in my life and using my abilities. And I will never forget, and the date was October 15th, 2014, when a gal by the name, I have it written down here because I look at Heather Hardy, but she had the nickname The Heat. And on stage in this major place in New York, she boxed and won the junior featherweight champion of the world and brought me on stage to give me the credit of working with her mentally for a half a year. And I never was involved in boxing I'm not into boxing at the same time. But it's funny, just what you say, how our lives detour if we make ourselves available and we learn to adapt. And the other thing that's disappearing today is people are not listening and hearing each other anymore. They're not listening. People say they're not getting a feel for because they've got the instantaneous remark. It's just, you understand what I'm saying, Bill?
I do. Robert Iger, the president of Disney, had a wonderful. He said a wonderful thing about communication. I use it in some of my motivational talks. Right? You asked me about that, and that is listen to people with the intention of understanding and not reacting immediately. You know what yeah, of course you know what I mean.
One of the most greatest gifts we have is a gift that the word became popular when I was a little kid. And nobody understood how this man was able to make people feel like he was only speaking to them. And the story, I forgot, his name was Arthur Godfrey.
Arthur Godfrey.
The word to describe him was empathy. And that's one of the greatest gifts we have, to be able to feel the way someone else feels. And obviously you've had to, because you've worked with people from all walks of life and had to embrace them, not just the food, because that was very, very private. But
is an extremely powerful emotion. I think that you're to make one sociological statement here. I think you're seeing a, a huge amount of empathy from non-white people, the black people at the present time because of what they've seen on the
Yes.
screen. You know, I'm not talking about protests and
No,
rioting.
no, no, I know.
I think that there is an enormous amount of empathy going on because of what we've seen, because of the body cams and people having iPhones. Empathy is a huge, powerful emotion. It's something that, whether it's your son, your daughter, your wife, your best friend, to understand how another person may be reacting or feeling, or to walk in their shoes.
To walk in their shoe. You see, when I was, one thing I say this because I do seminars for business groups, and they usually run about 5.5, 6 hours in a day's time. But I point out one of the things I learned as a kid. It sounds awfully simple, but I learned it from the American Indian, whom I always found fascinating, and that is that they had a philosophy: you don't judge anybody until you've walked in their shoes.
Yeah.
So when I was a kid, I made a habit in my life. When I met people and walked with them, I imitated their walk. It wasn't that I was imitating physiologically. I realized in retrospect, I was learning to kind of think the way they're thinking. So the American Indian, look at how many years ago that idea was there, and it means just as much today. We have no right to judge people unless we've spent some time in their thinking and in their world.
Wow. Kreskin, your life has been a remarkable life as a performer. I mean, you're peerless at what you do.
Thank you.
You have a sterling reputation in the business. Been in show business a long time, not quite as long as you, but have been. Sterling reputation in the business. And, you know, one of the good guys. Everybody, when I said the last couple of days, I'm going to be on, oh, Kreskin, I love it. Yes, that's what we hear.
Can I tell you something? You get a kick out of this. When Tom Hanks made the movie, I did not know about the movie, but I was sitting in New York, and an actress comes over to my table and says, Kreskin, I just had to leave a movie. I'm going to me just real quick. And she said, because I had an assignment elsewhere, but your name keeps coming up every day. It turns out that if you folks can look at on the internet, it's called The Great Buck Howard. And John,
I've seen, of course I went to
John Malkovich plays me in the movie, but you got to hear what's crazy about it. Hank said to me, he said, because my road manager had written, it's not a biography, but he plays me and my character. And Hank says, let me tell you the bad side about making a movie. And Tom Hanks is one of the nicest guys you ever wanted to meet. I said, what do you mean, Hank? And this was opening night on Broadway. He says, well, John Malkovich wanted to act as best as he could at the way you are. So we had the curse of him spending 3 days shaking hands with us for 10 minutes the way you shake it. He says, Kreskin, we need a card because I have an exciting handshake.
People watching who are unfamiliar with this, when you meet Kreskin, now, you know, you're up against something in the virus here, Kreskin. You may have to come up with a new one.
No, I gloves and everything else. You know, I have a feeling.
What's the reason for that? Now, come on.
You know, people
On the record, why do you shake hands so hard with people like
I've done it since I was a kid. I have an enthusiasm about people. I have an energy, and I jog. I'm 85 years old, and I jog, Bill, for 15 years now. Every night for about 20 minutes, I jog. I run. I have to. I think best when I run. So
I do that.
One thing when I'm running, I do not wear earphones. Everyone has to find a way to stop the world and listen to themselves. And we're not doing that.
I do that.
Close a kitchen door and just sit there, think about what you've done. Reflect. You understand what I mean, Bill? You want to
Sure, I do this. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's a pleasure talking to you.
Bill, I don't know. You are one of the, I have to tell you something, and I want everyone to know this, because when we come back, we're going to discuss a book you've written. And I just want you to know, folks, and it's called, by the way, it's called The Adventures of Spike the Wonder Dog. And it was written by Spike, told to Bill Boggs. It's
exactly right. That's well, he told me the story and I was able to get it down. Yeah.
It is. I read the book twice.
Yes.
Well, I read when it's been talked about. I read 4 books a night. I have a library of 8,000 books because I am constantly sending books to review and what have you. And I'm going to tell you, folks, when we come back on, we're going to talk about this. It's one of the most beautiful stories I have ever read in my life, and I mean it. I was deeply moved. I love animals. They don't betray people.
Thank you.
I've been sarcastic about because of politicians and what. By the way, I want everyone to know this, and you're a witness to this. I have nothing against politicians. I just wish that most of them had been on the Titanic. But aside from that, I can go on.
I think we're all in that boat with you, but we're not in the Titanic. All right, Chris.
No, well, when I come back, we're going to talk about the adventures of Spike as told to Bill Boggs, and you really captured him immensely. I love this. It is hard to believe, but and I mean this when I say this sincerely, and it was hinted by one of your reviewers. This book needs to be made into a motion picture.
Thank you.
And I really,
from your lips to Robert Iger's ear. That's it. There you go.
well, we're gonna come back, Bill, in the next segment, which is going to be seen in a week from now, and that's be the good Lord willing. I promise we're coming back.